everyone, welcome. Thank you so much for coming to our event this evening. My name is Darlene Elias, and I'm here representing the National Green Party, specifically the Women's Caucus. This event has been sponsored by the Women's Caucus. And we had an absolutely wonderful day on Capitol Hill, lobbying our senators and representatives in regards to the issue of public funding of campaigns. Our caucus is strongly advocating for 100% funding of public campaigns and public monies for campaigns. And this is an issue that is not one that I would say is strongly supported by many. However, we as the Green Party understand how important this issue is. For us to be able to raise monies and to have them matched so that we can run successful campaigns, electoral campaigns, particularly presidential campaigns, and have full ballot access. And so we had a team of people that showed up that have converged on Capitol Hill from all across the United States. Greens came in to make sure that they lobbied their senators and their U.S. representatives on this issue. And that's how strongly we feel about this. So thank you so much for taking your time today to be part of this group. We have a host of guests today that have something to say about this issue. And not just something to say, but they have something of substance to bring to the table on this issue. And we are very happy that they have come on board. Our first guest today is someone who likes to fight. He likes to go at it with the best of them. And he was just telling us that this week coming up, he has a boxing match, right? That he's really looking forward to and that he's preparing for. But also, one of his, favorite pastimes is to establish, he's a strategist, and he is from the Institute for Policy Studies. So another way that he fights the fight, the good fight, is by helping to establish good policy. And so we want to welcome Justin Jacoby Smith on this issue, and he's going to talk to us a little bit more about public funding. Thank you. Come on up. And you need to let us know what your strategy is, right, when it comes to fighting. Okay. Sure, please do.
Howdy folks, how's it going? Cool. So my name is Justin Jacoby Smith. I am a strategist at the Institute for Policy Studies, which has been working to turn progressive ideas into progressive action for more than 50 years. And I work on a variety of issues at IPS, but part of the reason they brought me in was because I spent a couple of years as an organizer with an organization called Democracy Spring, which was doing direct action on campaign finance reform. So I'm going to talk about a few things here. I'm going to talk about sort of the nature of the problem, right? That is to say why it is that we need public funding. And then I'm going to talk about a couple of approaches that we can take to achieve the goal of public funding. And other folks who are going to speak tonight, I'm sure, are going to be able to say more about the particulars of the value of public funding and the implementation details. I'm going to take a bit of a broader view coming from my organizing background. But I want to start by talking about the problem, right? The pernicious influence of big money in our politics. It's a fact, an unfortunate fact, that in most instances, money wins elections, right? Whether we like, and it's certainly not the case across the board. It's certainly not the case in every instance of elections. There are certainly cases where a candidate who perhaps spends less money but perhaps manages to inspire more volunteers, for example, and manages to mobilize more people to the polls, may manage to defeat someone who has outspent them. So it's certainly not always the case that the biggest spender is going to win the election, but generally speaking, we can say that money wins the election. And so the question has to be, who's funding it, right? And a tiny fraction of the wealthiest 1% are who are funding our politicians' campaigns. And they're making them dependent upon a minuscule fraction of the economic elite. And when they're dependent on those people, they're not dependent on everyday people like us. They're not dependent on the people who are supposed to be their constituents that they're supposed to be representing. And when that's what happens, they represent the interests of the billionaires and the millionaires, the corporations, at the expense of everyone else, right? And on issue after issue, whether it's climate change, whether it's income inequality, whether it's healthcare, we know that big money funding is standing in the way of progress on so many of the issues that we care about as people on the left, that we care about as progressives. We know that this is a significant thing that's standing in our way. And the history of this goes back a number of decades, right? There's a Supreme Court case called Buckley v. Vallejo that started to lay the groundwork for this in the 70s, and then a court case that many folks are very familiar with called Citizens United that really opened the floodgates in 2010 for enormous amounts of money to just be poured into our elections. And that means that people's voices are being drowned by the enormous amounts of dollars being poured into the elections, right? $6.4 billion was spent during the 2016 election. And in return for these donations, elected officials are passing laws that are good for their mega donors and bad for the rest of us. So I want to talk about a couple of examples that are specific instances of this here. One is one that you might be very familiar with, the NRA. People are already pretty well aware that in 2016, for example, we know that they gave $6 million to GOP candidates. We know that they gave another $3.2 million to GOP candidates in the 2018 midterms. And something interesting actually started to happen in 2018 that was new or unexpected, which is that the headlines you started to see were that gun control groups were suddenly spending as much as the NRA. Right, this is the headline that you started to see was oh, maybe now there's going to be some parity in terms of policy because these other interest groups are spending money equivalent to what the NRA is spending. So if you drill down a bit into what's actually going on there, what you find, in fact, is that the gun control groups were only giving a fraction of what the NRA had given in the past. What's actually going on is the NRA is giving significantly less. They gave less in the 2018 midterms than they've given in several of the last prior cycles, and they gave just a bit less than the gun control groups gave in 2018. So I think it's important that when we see headlines like this suggesting that, oh, there may be some kind of policy parity now because a different interest group is spending a large amount of money, we can't pretend as if that's going to result in policy that's going to benefit everyone just because there's a different interest group that's spending a lot of money, right? So we've got to be willing to hold that in mind. And there's a particular story about the NRA that I like to tell because it's an illustration of exactly how much of what's going on here amounts to legalized corruption. Right? And what happens here is that in South Dakota, there's a senator who tells a story in Larry Lessig's book, Republic Lost, about this issue. And a senator who talks about how the NRA essentially, in order to push him to take the position that they preferred, donated a substantial amount of money to his Democratic candidate, right? And this is sort of the pushback that you get occasionally when you bring up the NRA and its influence on Republicans. It's, oh, they don't just give to Republicans, they also give to Democrats, right? And yes, that's true. But what we find is that they're doing it to move the Republicans in the direction that they want the Republicans to go. So the NRA is one example of the use of money to impact policy and impact the positions of policymakers. It's very clear. Another example we can look at here, I'm just going to check my time, make sure that I'm doing okay. Yeah. So another example that we can look at here is something called the 1033 program. And I suspect folks in this room may be familiar with the 1033 program, but in case you're not, I'll give you just a bit of background on it. It was something that was initially created in the mid-1990s, and it is a way to pass military weaponry from the Department of Defense to police departments across the country. This was started again in the mid-1990s. It gives them rifles, grenade launchers, night vision goggles, armored vehicles, things like vehicles that are intended to withstand attacks by mines, for example, because of all of the mines that we apparently have in American streets. It's apparently very important for police departments to have access to these mine-resistant vehicles, or at least that is what the police department and the Fraternal Order of Police lobby would have you believe. It's very important for police to have access to this military weaponry. And this comes out of the kind of, the post-Cold War period, right? There was all of this excess military equipment that they needed to justify the existence of, and so they started saying, oh, well, we're going to get it onto American streets so that it can keep Americans safe. We're going to get all this excess capacity onto American streets. So here's what's interesting. This really jumped into the public consciousness in 2014 after the Ferguson uprising, right? People saw the amount of militarized weaponry that was in the streets during that uprising, and they thought, well, where did this come from? Why did the police have so much military weaponry? And it's because of this 1033 program. And what you find when you look at the records of the Congress people who keep voting to continue the 1033 program, they have received 73% more campaign money from the defense industry than the folks who were voting the other way. They've received a significantly higher amount of funding from the so-called defense industry, right? As if you could install 800 bases around your house and then say that it's for the defense industry, right? So if instead we lived in a world where candidates had to rely on public funding, this is a form of legalized corruption that disappears. Now, would there be other forms of corruption that might appear in a world of public funding? Certainly, yes. And there would be new approaches we'd have to come up with to begin to deal with those new forms of corruption. But this is a significant step in public funding that could close off these particular doors for corruption. So, with that said, I want to now just kind of spend a couple minutes talking about how do you build a movement that can advocate for public funding? And how do you do it in a way that's going to be different from folks that are trying to catch the media's attention for a variety of other issues? How do you do it in a way that's going to build momentum over time, right? These are important questions to consider. So a couple of ideas. One is something that's being pursued by a number of different organizations that's rooted in one way of looking at the civil rights movement. It's an idea that you start with local and statewide initiatives to build public pressure for federal reform. And so, for example, there's an organization right now called Represent.us, or Represent Us. And they have chapters across the country that are working to pass local anti-corruption acts. And these anti-corruption acts, among other things, call for public funding of local elections. And in 2018, Represent Us members helped to pass 23 Anti-Corruption Act reforms across the country. That's more than in any other time in the last several decades. And what they're saying in their strategic plan right now at Represent Us is that by 2022, they intend to pass dozens more of these anti-corruption acts, and they're pursuing a tipping point, right, where this rush of activity at the state level, at the city level, at the county level is going to lead to a sea change in public opinion, and that's going to lead to a change in federal law. So that's the approach that Represent Us is taking, is trying to do these local and statewide initiatives. Other organizations have also taken this tack as well. For example, Mayday is another organization that's working in a similar fashion to try to pursue similar ends. Common Cause occasionally works on similar initiatives as well. So this local or statewide initiative approach is one way that you can build public pressure for federal reform. There's a second idea though, and this is one that I can pull from my direct knowledge and experience on, and this is about strategic nonviolent direct action campaigns to build public pressure on this issue. So I want to talk a bit about Democracy Spring, which was the organization I organized with for a couple years of my life. We started in 2016 with a march that went from Philadelphia to DC here. So in the course of about 12 days, we went 140 miles. And by the time we got here, the march had grown to a couple thousand people. And over the course of the week of our arrival, we had civil disobedience action happening on the steps of the Capitol for the entire week that we were here. There were over 1,200 folks arrested over the course of the week engaging in civil disobedience, and we were doing that in support of the law which would become what we now know of as H.R. 1. Right? This law that's recently been passed that we know needs work, that we know needs expansion, nonetheless, we were acting in support of what we saw as valuable first steps in the For the People Act and a couple of other things that were on the table at the time. Now, that was our sort of launch event, but the second, and I might even say equally, if not more important aspect to the campaign took place at the local level, where we had smaller nonviolent direct action campaigns that were targeting office holders reluctant to get on board with our push for public funding. And so these were folks who might, in some instances, be considered allies, right? People who might, in some instances, be considered to be, quote-unquote, on our side on a number of issues. But if they weren't wrong on the issue that we were pushing for, we were there to push them to go the right way. And that got us some flack, that got us some blowback. Some people were saying, why are you attacking your allies, and so on. And these are the sorts of things that you hear when you kind of upset the organizational ecology, right, that is around you, and the relationships that exist. Sometimes you get significant pushback if you start trying to push people in a direction that they're reluctant to go. But we know that this is the right direction to move in. That's why we were pushing folks in the House, and as well as folks in state legislators, to move on these issues. What we were trying to push for was simply a pledge that they would support public funding, as well as a couple of other what we call democracy reforms that were about guaranteeing voting rights and about ending the effective rule of citizens united. Right? Now, this was the approach that we were taking, several years ago. As some of you may have heard, 2016 was a bit of a circus, and it did. Our plan did not execute with the cleanliness that we would have preferred. We did not have the outcomes that we had initially planned on because the election turned out to be messier than we anticipated. But I can say, and I'm excited to report, some of you might have heard about something called the Green New Deal. That certainly the Green Party has been pushing for a number of years, and now in the last several months has really pushed its way into the public consciousness, and that has been a consequence of an organization working in a very similar model to what Democracy Spring was doing, which is to say they're working to get folks signed on to reject fossil fuel money, and those folks who are refusing that pledge, those folks who are refusing to make that commitment, they then challenge them with nonviolent direct action, and when that happens, and you get the spotlight and lightning strikes, you can really push something, into the public consciousness in a really profound way and change the political weather in a really profound way. So that particular model of using commitments on your issue and strategic nonviolent direct action to push people who are too slow on your issue in the right direction strikes me as a really valuable approach if we're thinking about how you build a movement for public funding of elections. So that's what I've got. Thanks for listening for a minute.
Thank you.
Great.
So the other thing I wanted to let you know, Justin, and I'm going to just pull this up here. Justin, I'm not sure if you're aware, that was an understatement about the Green New Deal.
Right.
Because the people in this room, we're responsible for the Green New Deal. That's right. And the Green New Deal as it exists with the Democratic Party was co-opted by us. So, just to let you know that we are very aware of the non-directive action that needs to take place. But I like your style about that 1-2 punch that's going on. You have like this 1-2 punch going on as far as enforcing and strongly encouraging policy and the push for policy. So thank you for your speech.
Question for Justin.
Yes.
Yeah, Justin, you were involved with NRA, the action against NRA. Yes. You want to tell a little bit about that?
Take the microphone.
Okay.
Hey Justin, you were involved in action with NRA and you had an article about that and things. You wanted to speak real quick about that? Explain it?
Say a bit about it. Yeah, so I've been involved in a number of different kinds of direct actions, right, on a number of different issues. And one of the issues that I've been involved with is hitting up NRA headquarters with a number of other folks who are concerned about the pernicious influence that they have on our politics. And as a part of that action, there were civil disobedience involved. You know, we blocked the doorways. A number of folks were arrested, unfortunately. But the action itself was really a very moving, I think, instance of people displaying commitment, displaying that they're serious about the need to address this problem because they recognize how serious the problem itself is, right? That our entire democracy really is under threat in ways that many don't realize. And so it's a display of commitment and a display of the recognition of the seriousness of the issue that people are willing to pick up civil disobedience, something that high risk, something that serious, as a way to tackle this problem.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
But I also think that you're very right, Justin. The issue here, as we see with the NRA, they're the most explicit and the most blatant and the most obvious example of why dark monies shouldn't be at Capitol Hill, right? Or funding public elections. This is why we haven't had any progress or movement, even though we continue to have one incident after another in our country where there's been too many victims due to gun violence. So thank you for that, and thank you for your continued work.
That's one of the things, because how many people are paying tax dollars to pay off all the lawsuits for the people that are being killed? Millions and millions of dollars. That could be saved right there.
All right.
So our next guest, he tells me, because I like to share with people some lighter things about them and some fun stuff. He says to us that he used to sing musicals while waiting on the corner for the school bus. So he used to entertain everybody waiting on that corner by singing and dancing. And he's one of our favorite people as far as the Green Party goes. He is the caucus of the Black Chair. Excuse me, he's the caucus of the chair of the Black Caucus. Oh my God, what a tongue twister, right? He is the chair of the Black Caucus right now, and he's also the chair of the Washington, D.C. chapter of the Green Party. And we'd like to welcome up here Darryl Moch.
Thank you. Hello. Hello. It is great to be hanging out with you guys on a Wednesday evening. What a better spring day than we've had. It just felt like earlier in the week we were still having winter all over again. It felt last night like we were starting over in November, going into December, not moving into April. So I've got a couple of things that I want to share and have us sort of think about and explore as we talk about the issues of money and politics and what all that breeds and what's happening. And so the first thing I want to sort of start with is this idea of calling of fairy dust and political illusion. And so I was having a conversation this morning with my little brother who called me, and he was very upset and crying. We have another brother that he did meet. My brother under me died when he was about 19 and 18. He was 18, and he was killed in Los Angeles. Ironically, he was killed in almost virtually the same place that Nipsey Hussle was killed just earlier this week. And so my younger brother, went to school with people in that area for a period of time in elementary school, and another of his friends was also killed in the same area, also again by gun violence. And so he was particularly feeling this jarring connection to loss, because he called me and said, where was Fanon, which is my brother's name, where was he killed? And so I told him, and that just sort of took him to a whole nother space. But as we talked about that, we talked about the permissive nature of oppression and of people not being able to get out of of systems, and then looking at how the design of urban areas, particularly Los Angeles where I'm from, how some of these areas were designed and were created in some ways that allow people, well, rather that prevented people from being able to get out. And so they were stuck, many times stuck. And so he noted that he was moved, his parents, my dad and his mom, shifted him out of that system of the school he was at, and so he went somewhere else, and that moved him away from that small circle that he still had some relationship with. In fact, Nipsey went to the same high school that my brother went to, and but it was 2 years ahead of him. And so my brother said something about, it's all just fairy dust. Nothing changes. None of this stuff really is mattering. No matter what we're doing, nothing gets better. No matter what we try to change, when people try, he says, if you try to change the system, you get shot. And he referred back to Malcolm X, he referred back to Martin Luther King Jr., he referred back to others that we know about that have done things that sort of suggested that change could happen, and things could be different for a community, that our country could be different, that the world could be different. And so for him, I had to say, and what I'm saying to all of us, is that what is it that we believe? And what is it that we're willing to do? Because we can only do the pieces of the pie that we have for us to do. And we cannot be overly concerned about whether all of that's going to change, but change the person, the people, or the system where you're at. Do what it is that we can do in our own sphere of influence. And so if you worry about, is it going to happen? I said to him that everything that I do, I have to do knowing that if that is possible, that by being a change agent, that there is a target for me, then I have to do it, understanding that, but not being worried about that. I can't leave out of my house every day worried about whether or not there's a target on me. But yet and still, I have to do the work that we have before us, that we've taken to our hands, that I feel called to. And so I said to him, you have to find your calling, and what is it that you're called to do? So I asked again, what do we believe? Do we believe that we can make change? Do we believe that by electing different people? Do we believe that by getting money out of politics? Do we believe that change can happen? And if so, then we have to work for it. What are we willing to work for? If you're not sure what you're willing to work for, then we're just doing stuff. And we're like standing in the middle of the ground, the world is revolving around us. And nothing's happening and nothing's changing because we're not sure what we're doing and why we're doing it. What are we willing to give up for what we say we want, for the we that we're talking about? Green Party often is all about the we, right? So what is it that we collectively say we're about? And in doing that, how much of the I am I willing to give up? How much I can I spare? How much of the I that doesn't exist in the word we can I give up in order to live out or enact what it is that I believe? So we're working on ending moneyed interests that fuel the policies and politics that destroy democracy. It's fairy dust to believe that if we had more money, we threw more money into it, that it would make something different. It would just be more money doing the same thing that money does. It corrupts. And so we have to find those ways and those mechanisms, but it is also true that we have to have the resources in order to fight against the machine that's doing the things that we want to change, right? So we've got to find a way to do that, and whether that is directly with financial resources or if it's using social media, independent media, and other sources of resources to make the same impact that moneyed interest can make, we've got to figure out what that tipping point is so that we can get into it. So that we can push that envelope, so that we can do it. We've got to every day push back on this idea that if you don't vote for the two, what I call the Spruce Goose and the Queen Mary parties, that if we don't push back on those entities, that somehow we're contributing to one or the other doing something. They're already the same thing. They're just different hats, depending on which day and how they feel. So we have more to do around that issue. Oppression is not accidental. It is planned. Now, whether or not it was initially, hey, let's let's create an urban environment, we'll put people over here, people over there, and they won't fight with each other, and everybody will be okay, they can get along, we can live in a city together and have harmony, and we'll just be in our different sections. If maybe that was the original intent. But once people figured out that you could control and manipulate people, that you could prevent people from moving up or doing something different, once they figured out that oppression worked, oppression is planned now. The policies that are enacted, the legislation that's passed, these are planned because they know the ramifications of them, because those episodes have happened in other places. And so we know now what works and what doesn't work in urban environments and in rural environments and in suburban environments. We know what works. But the choice not to implement things that work is planned oppression. Voter suppression, corporate money influencing politics, wealth unchecked, money equaling power versus people equaling power. The belief that people will make folks think is that money has power. And so we can't fight against that interest. We can't fight the groups that have more money than we do because it has power and they're going to influence. When the truth is, people have power. People are the power. As Justin said earlier, if we show up, they have to listen. The issue is that as we look around the room, we don't always show up. And it's not because we don't care. I don't want to put that on the people that aren't in the room. It's because we're so busy doing the things and trying to live and survive that another meeting, another thing just may not be on the table. But we've got to figure out how to show. How do we organize and galvanize a body politic of people who are disenfranchised and disengaged? Because there are millions of people who just don't vote. We should be targeting those people. We should be waking them up and saying, we're here. We know that you don't vote and we know why you don't vote. And if you come into this, we will work for your interests because your interests are our interests. We need to wake up that sleeping giant. The truth is, people have power and people are the power. And unless we get them to realize that, we give up our power every day. DC statehood. So if you don't get anything else out of today, we want to make sure that you're clear about DC statehood. Black and brown people versus white money. That's what statehood is about, really. The city, black and brown, predominantly for a very long time. And the prediction is, the whiter it gets, the more likely we are to get statehood. That's the prediction, right? And so we begin to see more and more Congress people are signing on to the idea of statehood. But yet it hasn't happened. And so we need you to understand that nearly 1 million people in the District of Columbia, we're getting close to 1 million people now, have no congressional representation. So wherever you're from and wherever you go, you need to be talking about that because we have this kind of disenfranchisement right here in our country. Millions of people in DC are at the forefront of any movement to create change in our country. If this changing the statehood of DC is not in the forefront of the politics that we're talking about, we're not talking about changing oppression, we're not talking about making lasting change. Because we can't say we want all that and leave 1 million people here alone and then add in Puerto Rico and add in the territories and other places who have no voices and have no representation. So money and power are the root of the injustice. So I want to just say as I close out the last thing, we talked about, someone mentioned the Green New Deal. The Green New Deal was really a strategic plan when we had. The original Green New Deal was only called a deal because it was a throwback to the idea of the New Deal. It wasn't about a deal. When it was co-opted by others, it became about a deal, about a negotiation, right? It was intended to be an encompassing plan that pulled together a series of actions designed to place people and planet over profits. It was never intended to be a deal, quote unquote, that we could negotiate around, right? It was intended to be a strategy pulling together significant parts of issues in a comprehensive program building on the intersections necessary to rebuild both a way of life and a sustainable life on this planet. Money and power are at the root of the theft of this idea and its loss. It's not about whether or not the Green New Deal, who owned it, who started it, who got it. Some folks threw it out there in a way that it would fail. in order to steal the muster and the energy of this body of people that are making waves across the country that people are beginning to pay attention to, that we're saying things that matter to everyday people. And so they can co-opt the language of it, which then begins to nullify. We have to find a way to take back the concept and the message and the strategy that is in that deal, in the green new way, right? We have to find a way to do that and to share that so that people once again feel empowered to make change with their vote. We can do all the argument, all the commentary, all the fighting we want to do, but unless we get people to go out and vote for the candidates that are going to make change, it's just fairy dust.
You know, Darryl, you're making me think a little bit about an encounter we had earlier today when we went to Darren Soto's office. Myself and Catherine and Kai and Josh and Jennifer Sullivan. The interesting thing is that we went in and we talked about voters' rights, right, and voter suppression. And the interesting thing is the aide said to us, and she's a black woman, she said, voting is a privilege. And we said, okay. No, voting is a right. And so it's really challenging and difficult when people are seeing voting as a privilege, right? And in her mindset, it's a privilege, right? Because she perhaps can get to a voting poll. She perhaps is not suppressed with voter ID suppression, right? She has the ability to take time off of work, right? And get to a voting poll. So these are the issues, and this is the kind of mentality that we're struggling with every day. My suggestion would be a national holiday for Election Day, right? Voting on Sundays, mandatory registration of voting, right? So that everybody exercises their right to voting. That's how we're going to deal with oppression. And so thank you very much for bringing that up. The next guest that we have, he said to me that he is enemies with the mayor of Washington, D.C. And what's interesting about it, he says that Mayor Bowser, she went on DC Public Radio this past Friday, I think it was, and she publicly criticized him for his advocacy around public funding. And he thinks, though, that she remembers when he filed an ethics complaint against her. So, you know, I would have to say that Craig Holman is kind of a guy after my own heart and probably of the Green Party of the United States, and he's our next speaker.
Thank you very much. As was said, I'm Craig Holman. I'm the Government Affairs Capitol Hill lobbyist for Public Citizen, which is an organization that Ralph Nader began several years ago. By the way, I'm one of the only lobbyists on Capitol Hill that will call himself lobbyists. No one else does that. I've even got it on my business card. I lobby for lobby reform against lobbyists. And so that's basically the nature of my job. You know, my mother won't even tell her neighbors that I'm a lobbyist. And she's proud that I work for Public Citizen, but she's not going to tell them anything like that. You know, before I actually begin what I came here to talk about, I want to, HR 1 was brought up, and I want to emphasize how important and monumental this legislation is. It is 700 pages long. It includes everything from public financing for presidential and congressional elections, ethics reform for the executive branch and for Congress, revolving door restrictions, voting rights, making the election day a national holiday. It even has statehood for DC in it. This is a sweeping, comprehensive bill, and what makes it really important is that every single Democrat and independent in the Senate has co-sponsored it, and every single Democrat in the House has co-sponsored it. Never before in the history of the United States have we seen that kind of unanimity behind the legislation. No doubt that unanimity will, fracture as it becomes more real, but at least we've got everybody on board behind the concepts that we can hold them accountable for. Now, the title of this event was How Public Funding Will Save Us Money. I really think we ought to look at it, the whole question the other way, and that is, what does it cost us not to have public financing of elections? There are three huge costs. One is the accountability of lawmakers to the public. The second is the integrity of the governmental service of government itself, political corruption. And the third is the public's confidence in what the government is all about. Let me throw some numbers at you, just so you see what's going on with the current private financing system. Every election that we've had, at least since 1998, has become more expensive under the privately financed system. In 1998, $1.4 billion was spent on all congressional elections. In 2018, Justin cited the figure earlier, like $6 billion was spent. We're talking about a 400% increase. As we're going into 2020, I am fully expecting $8 to $9 billion being spent on the presidential and congressional elections combined. And where does this money come from? 1, 2, 3. Wall Street, number one. Number two is real estate developers. Number three are us lobbyists and lawyers. I'm probably not really one of those, but those are the three main industries where all this money comes from. And to make it worse yet, Justin was citing some of these figures, but I really want to drive them home with concrete figures. Of reportable contributions that have been made to any candidate in the federal system, any candidate anywhere, only 0.47% have made any contributions of $200 or more. That's half of 1% making a reportable contribution in the U.S. And that money, by the way, accounts for 71% of all the money that is spent, all that 8, 9, 10 billion we're going to see. And unfortunately, that's not even the worst of the story. The worst is when you take a look at that fraction of Americans that have made contributions. We're literally talking about 1% of that fraction accounts for 1/3 of all the money. These are basically, if I can stereotype them, old white guys living in New York, Chicago, and DC that are paying for our Congress and our president. When you take a look at outside spending, especially by super PACs, in the last election, or in 2016, when it was a presidential election, literally the greatest bulk of all this outside spending came from 50 families. 50 families. That's it. So we are talking about, some really, really suspicious characters that are actually buying our government and paying for it. Justin also brought up, does money win? Yes, it wins. I mean, we know offhand that 90% of the biggest spenders win when it comes to congressional elections. And even if you were to try to break that down as to, well, did the money win as opposed to incumbency advantage, what's really important is that every candidate believes the money wins. And that perception means that they need that money and they will do whatever they need to do to get that money. So the consequences of private financing is, first, since so much money comes from very, very few people, in this country, it really just pushes small donors out. I mean, I rarely make a campaign contribution because I can only afford like 20 or 50 bucks. And I know that isn't going to matter, except to maybe some, favorite candidate like Zephyr Teachout or something like that. But, it pushes small donors out. It pushes people of color out. Listen to this statistic. In the last presidential election, if you take a look at just some zip codes as to where the money came from, the Manhattan zip code, the very wealthy part of Manhattan, 10021, there was $4.2 million contributed out of that zip code to presidential candidates. Right next door, in Harlem, zip code 10035, the total amount contributed to presidential candidates was $3,750. Take a look at, and candidates know that. They know where this money is coming from. And fundraising distracts lawmakers from actually doing their duties. There have been a number of political science studies that pretty well conclude that in the privately financed system, candidates spend about 34% of their time fundraising. That's a third of their official duties are actually cut down, wiped out, and they do fundraising. There was a study that compared that to some publicly financed systems, and they found that just 8% of publicly financed candidates spend only 8% of their time fundraising. And then the accountability. I already mentioned Wall Street, developers, lobbyists, and lawyers. There's another big category of sources of funds that particularly affects the District of Columbia, and that is government contractors. WAMU did this massive study on how much money is coming from government contractors to DC council candidates and to the mayor, and documented that literally it's 25 to 35% of all their campaign money comes from contractors. And clearly, there's a reason for this. And what I find really another exciting and upbeat note when it comes to the District of Columbia is these stories of corruption and of government contractors buying favor with their DC council has resulted this year in the DC Council passing the most sweeping campaign finance reform and governmental ethics reforms all in one session. I've never seen any single jurisdiction do both public financing and banning government contractors from making campaign contributions in 1 year. And yet that's exactly what the DC system has done. In terms of public financing, there's about 27 states, counties, and cities around the country that have some form of public financing. But the most significant one that's happening right now is called the Small Donor Revolution. And that is what DC is now setting up, in effect, for the 2020 elections. That is for any small contribution of $100, the candidate will receive $5 in public funds. So a $100 contribution from me would give that candidate actually $600, $500 in public financing. Furthermore, for the candidate to agree to that, to get that type of public financing, they have to agree not to accept any contributions over $100. So it just empowers the small donors. It empowers us. And that's what DC is happening. These systems work, by the way. New York City has had a similar system in effect ever since the 1990s. And it works there very well. They have about a 92% participation rate of all candidates join the public financing system. There have been studies of the New York City campaign finance system done by a good friend of mine, a political scientist, Michael Malcolm, that shows, one, it creates more competitive races. Two, makes small donors much more important and sought after by the candidates. It brings a more diverse donor base into the campaigns. The New York City Board will actually publish on the webpage where donations come from, and it comes from all wards, all through the city now, because of the small donor revolution. And Michael Melvin found that it increases political participation. It turns out if I chip in 20 bucks to someone's campaign, I've got a stake in it, and I want to get more involved. And I will put up lawn signs, I will do other activities, and so I get more involved in the political process. That's what the small donor public financing revolution is all about. And the most important thing of it, and this is what I want to close with, the most important thing is that it changes who lawmakers are accountable to. They're no longer accountable to those 50 families. Instead, they're accountable to people who can chip in 20 bucks or maybe 100 bucks, the small donors. It just shifts the whole attitude of those who are lawmakers as to who they're representing. And for a change, they're actually representing us. That's how important public finance is. So, thank you.
Thank you. So we know now why Mayor Bowser doesn't like you, right? You know, as a Green Party, all of our individual donations for campaigns or contributions come from individual donors, so we definitely understand what you're talking about. And it is revolutionary, and we are a revolutionary party, so we are looking to change things for the better. Our next, oh, that's right.
Speaking of small donations, we are running in small donations, so the National Women's Caucus of the Green Party is asking if anybody's interested in buying raffle tickets. That's one ticket for $2. $5 to get you 5 tickets, $10 to get you 15 tickets, and you can choose any of the items on the table over there. So we also have Greens versus Green t-shirts for $20. Those are separate. But anyway, thank you for working for bringing small donations, and we hope that we can just get the tax dollars and just be done with having to ask people for donations.
So our next guest told me that he is blessed to have cousins in Hawaii where he can surf for free. I want to have cousins in Hawaii where I can surf for free also, or at least try to. He is Howie Hawkins. He is a very well-known, high-profile candidate for the Green Party. And he is one of those originals, what I like to say OGs, right, who further developed the Green New Deal. Howie.
I always like to move to the left, but I guess I'm gonna be able to this time.
It's hard.
Oh, okay, all right. Okay, let's talk about campaign finance reform, what's on the table now. What's on the table now is a retreat for progressives from what was on the table 20 years ago. It used to be a clean money model, full public campaign financing. You qualify, all the candidates get an equal grant. And often these bills said, number one, that you had to participate in the public debate in order to participate in the public funding. And number two, that you had access to the public airways at federal level or even cable at state level. And then some billionaires' money showed up around 2012, and they had a whole new strategy. And that was called matching funds, which is all Watergate reform. That's how we got the presidential primary matching funds. And what does that do? You sprinkle a little public money on the old big pile of private money, the old big pile of crap, and you just sprinkle a little bit, cover it over it, and say, look what we did. And that's a reform that doesn't reform, but that's what's on the table now in Congress. There used to be clean money bills, there's not anymore. So what's the problem with the matching funds? Well, number one, it doesn't restrict private contributions. So it may set limits on individual contributions, but it doesn't set a limit on the total amount of money that you can raise. It does nothing about the black or the dark money, or about the super PACs, the independent expenditures, or about billionaires reaching into their pocket and buying an election. So to say matching funds is going to make much difference is, I think, misleading the people. And wrong for progressives to act like this is big change. We've had matching funds in New York City, 6-to-1 match, not a 1-to-1 match like we've had the presidential primary funds. And if you watch, particularly the mayoral elections, but the city council elections as well, the way the papers cover it, the way the politicians handicap each other, is how much private money they're raising. And they have a cap on how much private money you can raise in that system. They're trying to go statewide, they don't even have that cap. And the real estate money still dominates. So that's why a so-called progressive mayor is driving the working class out of Manhattan and much of Brooklyn, because the rent is too damn high. And this is called, progress. The second problem with matching funds is it magnifies the inequalities between the amount of money people can raise privately. Simple math. I raise $10,000, but my opponent raises $20,000. 6-to-1 match, I get $70,000, he gets $140,000. The difference before was $10,000 between us. After matching funds, the difference is $70,000. So this is something the incumbents love, because they're going to get a bunch of public money, and it's going to magnify the difference between them and any challengers that haven't built out the base they have. So this is a status quo reinforcing reform. Now, what we had back in the 90s was called clean money, full public campaign financing. Every candidate who qualifies gets an equal grant, and you have a level playing field between the candidates. And this has been done in Arizona and Maine, and the Republicans always tell you, well, I don't want my money to go to support some politician I don't support. You talk to those Republican politicians in Maine or in Arizona, and all but a few of them participate in this public campaign finance system. And that's because even Republicans don't like getting on the phone and begging for money. And they prefer to, get their piece of money and then go out and campaign. And to qualify, you need to show and demonstrate support. That means qualify for the ballot. States have 51, we count DC as a state, 51 different state laws for how you qualify. But you get on the ballot, and then you get a certain number of $5 contributions to demonstrate support. And it's not ridiculous. In Maine, if you're running for the House, you need $65 contributions. Any serious candidate can do that. And somebody who's so privileged they can't do that probably shouldn't be getting public money. It's $175 for the Senate and $3,200 to run for governor. That's reasonable. Another thing in the Arizona law, if you accept the public money, you got to participate in the debate. So my fellow Teamster, I was a Teamster running against Andrew Cuomo in New York. He wouldn't debate me. He wouldn't debate the Republican, except for one little radio debate. He agreed to it the last minute that nobody heard because it was at a time when nobody was listening. It was during a Monday Night Football game. That's when he likes to have his debates. The governor, basically, the media comes, oh, governor, will you debate? And he says, okay. In 2010 we debated Monday Night Football a week before the election in Buffalo on public radio or TV. So not that many saw it. It was so obscure they let Juan Gonzalez from Democracy Now! Be one of the commentators. So anyway, so my fellow Teamster, Angel Torres, president of his local in Phoenix, is the baggage handlers at the airport, is up there debating the Democrat and Republican. And I'm dealing with Andrew Cuomo, who's got $50 million private money. And now in New York, they're having a big fight over matching funds. And the Democrats in the Assembly always pass this bill for matching funds. And they knew that it wouldn't pass because the Republicans had the Senate. So the big effort for the Democrats was to get the Democrats in the state Senate. Now the Democrats in the Assembly are like, wait a minute. If we go public funding, then our opponents are going to use super PACs and independent expenditures and kill us. So we can't do even matching funds. We used to have a bill for clean money in New York. But what happened in 2012, well, let me just say a little bit about more public money, and I'll tell you what happened in 2012. Arizona and Maine have it, as I mentioned. Connecticut has it as well, but it's a very biased system. Really hard for third parties to get on. The Greens and the Libertarians sued. They won at every level of the court, but then it got appealed to a federal court, maybe it was the Supreme Court, and they let the law stand. So the threshold for a startup, small party is many multiples of what a Democrat or Republican has to do to get access to the public money. But we had a Green, Nina Martinez, ran for state assembly. She got 28% in this last election, and she's the first in Connecticut, but she had to work, you know, twice or 3 or 4 times harder than the Democrats and Republicans to get their public money. We had it in North Carolina. Judges were elected with this equal grants thing until the Tea Party took control of the state legislature and they got rid of it. But that's just to say we should have full public campaign finance. You know, these people down here in Washington think, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. You from the Hicks and Syracuse. We can't do that. Yeah, well, we've done it. Paul Wellstone used to put bills in about it. You know, back in the 1990s, it actually came from some activists in the peace movement like Randy Keeler and Marty Jeezer. I don't know, maybe some old people, those of us Vietnam era vets and activists know. They came up with this idea. They got people like Public Citizen to pick it up. Donna Edwards, who became a congresswoman, was, you know, as a staff person at Public Citizen working on this. And Wellstone put it in. And in March 2000, public opinion polls said, when they described the system, it's going to be, you don't raise private money. If you opt in, you get nothing but public money. Every candidate gets an equal grant. What do you think? 69% of Americans said, great. And 19% said no. So this was something that had popular support. But of course, the problem in American politics is what the people want doesn't get translated into public policy. Because the people don't rule, the oligarchy rules. So that's where we were. And then, like I said, we got it past Arizona, Maine, a little bit in North Carolina, and Connecticut. And then it kind of stalled. We're in the Bush era. There was a war. There's a lot of other things going on. Obama got elected, everybody went to sleep. And then in 2012, a lot of billionaire money said, we're going to finance a movement for matching funds. And the strategy was do it first in New York and then go to Congress. And some of the people behind this was one of the Facebook founders, Chris Hughes, Sean Eldridge, his husband. There was a Rockefeller heir, the Committee for Economic Development, a old school, basically domestic industry and retail industry lobby for big business. Obama's Organizing for America, which was funded by the likes of Citigroup and Duke Energy and Lockheed Martin, and nonprofits like Move On, and George's son, Jonathan Soros, who started a group called Friends of Democracy, which today absorbed public campaign, which used to push for full public campaign financing, and it's now called Every Voice. And its real thing is a super PAC called Every Voice Action. And what tends to happen in the nonprofit world is the big money sets the agenda and the staffers follow. You can read about the plan. Ilsa Hogue, who is now head of NARAL, has been the head. She's been active in Greenpeace. She's head of Move On. She was a contender for the DNC chairmanship. She was the one really pushing that. And they had this whole plan and a lot of money. And New York, I described that. It didn't, you know, the Republican Senate blocked it. And then now the Democrats in the Assembly, man, they used to run on that, and now they won't do it. So anyway, that's what happened in 2012. And that's why today we don't talk about full public campaign financing, the clean money model. We talk about matching funds, which we've had since Watergate, presidential primaries. Really hasn't made a difference. People like, you know, especially since Obama, there's so much money involved, what the feds match. It sets a maximum on the amount you can raise. So people say, we're going to raise more private money. We just can't deal with this chump change from the federal government, which was Greens, this big money. So if people want to read more about, you know, what happened in 2012, and, you know, a case study in New York, I wrote a memo that's on my campaign webpage, Hawkins for Governor. I was Green Party candidate for governor last year. It's HowieHawkins.org. and look under issues in the op-eds and policy papers and go to reverse chronological order. This paper was updated in 2015, but it's got all the stuff I just talked about if you want to get more details. So that brings us to where we are now, HR1. And has a lot of good stuff in it, but I'm telling you, the public campaign finance stuff, the matching funds, is a retreat from the full public campaign financing that the Greens have advocated, that a lot of people used to advocate, and which we ought to advocate. So it's not just president, it's the House. The proposal in there is a 6-to-1 match for donations up to $600 with a $1,000 maximum contribution. So to qualify, you need $50,000 in these small dollar contributions from at least 1,000 individuals. Now, a good Green candidate could probably get that, but there's still problems. There's still a lot of private money. There's nothing here stopping them from coming in and flooding the election, even those that opt into this system. And the matching funds magnifies the difference between an upstart Green and an established Democrat or Republican. So it doesn't really change that, but we should be aware of that, because in the Greens we talk mostly about the presidential thing. Bruce Dixon read the bill and wrote a Black Agenda report that it's a 5-fold increase in qualifying for primary matching funds. So instead of $5,000 in 20 states, it's $25,000 in 20 states, or $500,000, which is a lot of money for a small party. The match is raised from 1-to-1 to 6-to-1, so if you meet the threshold, we're going to have a lot more money. But it lowers the maximum amount of money that's matched from $250 to $200. So that's the dimensions there. But beyond that, as Michael O'Neill in the Green Party, guy up in New York, who managed my campaign last year, he was reading that bill and he said, look, in the general election, they used to give grants. For a major party, it's equal grants. I remember when Obama became a running, it was about $75 million. Obama said, no, I can raise more money, I'm not opting in, after he said he would. McCain couldn't raise the money, so he took it. He was the last candidate for president from a major party that took that money. There's been no minor party that's qualified. So you got to get 5%, in the next cycle you're qualified. And there's also money for party, what is it? Party, not party building, but I guess it's ballot access. Anyway, there's money in between, so if we got the 5%, we get some money. Now, that's out, and it'll be matching funds. The matching funds will just continue. If you qualify in the primary season, you will get it in the general, and it's that 6-to-1 match. So that's what's on the table. It's not for public campaign financing, and I think when we talk about election reform, the two things that I would think would really be game changers. Because even if we get a full public campaign finance system, it has to be voluntary. It can't stop the super PACs, it can't stop the dark money, can't stop the billionaire from reaching in their pocket because of all these different court decisions, from Buckley v. Vallejo, the United Citizen, there's some others, McCutcheon. So what we really need is a constitutional amendment. And there are a bunch in there to deal with Citizens United, but there's only one to deal with all these cases, and it's called the We the People Amendment, which a lot of Greens have been involved in promoting. And what it does, it's very simple language. You should look it up. It's House Joint Resolution 48, We the People Amendment. Pramila J. Paul is now his prime sponsor. And I forget how many co-sponsored. It's maybe about 25, I think. And it does two things. It basically ends corporate personhood, which says corporations have the same rights as natural persons, because the law says only natural persons have constitutional rights. And there's a whole history there. Some of you know it goes back to the railroad decisions, and the 14th Amendment to give rights to freed slaves was used by the corporations to give rights to themselves. And actually it was never a court decision. It was written in the introductory description by a clerk, which was not supposed to be the law, but was taken as the law by subsequent judges. It's a mess. But anyway, the corporations got that. And the other thing is, the money is speech doctrine in elections. This amendment would reverse those, so it would throw out Buckley v. Vallejo on. And what it would do is enable us to regulate elections in all respects. And then we can deal with the super PACs, the dark money, the billionaires buying their own office or somebody else's office. So that's one. And the other is proportional representation. We talk a lot about ranked choice voting, but the reality is, with one-party districts, single-member district elections, That may mean the Greens get more votes in the first round, but a lot of districts, it's still going to just reinforce whoever the major party is. It does deal with the lesser evil dilemma to some extent, but it doesn't change the power. What proportional representation does is to give every party representation in the legislative body in proportion to their support. The Greens have enough support to be in legislatures now. We should be in the debate not just before an election, to the extent we get covered, but after the election. You know, in a lot of districts, you know, I mentioned Mina Martinez. She got 28%. But those people in that district have no representation who supported her. Nothing. You can be in a close district and lose a race 49 to 51%. The 49% gets no representation. Most industrial democracies, modern democracies, have proportional representation. But not this country, except in a few localities, like Cambridge, Massachusetts. And we've had it, New York City had it for a time. So that is the big change. And when we talk about ranked choice voting, I want us to say not just for the executive single seat offices, but also for the legislative offices, which you can do with a single transferable vote. That's what they do in Cambridge, Massachusetts. That's what New York City did between 1936, or they topped it in 36, elections 37 through 45. And they went from being a city council that was 95% Democrats with a Republican or two, to being a council that they have elections every 2 years, 5 to 7 parties. There was a fusion party representing the LaGuardia people. The Republicans got some representation. The Democrats got less. There was an American Labor Party. There was a Socialist Party. And there were even some fusions between them. But in any case, the voters have more choices. And horror of horror, black people started getting elected from Harlem and Brooklyn. One of them was a communist. And the Cold War started after World War II, and they freaked out and they got rid of it. They got rid of it there in Long Beach, and Yonkers also had it. They had it in Cincinnati and Ashtabula, Ohio. And of course, Cincinnati, when the black guy got elected, they said, oh, we got to get rid of this. Well, times have changed. The fact is, proportional representation tends to give women's and ethnic minorities, as well as political minorities, more representation than fair share representation. That's really the game changer as far as I'm concerned. But if we get back to campaign finance, let's go for the We the People Amendment and full public campaign financing. And that's the kind of thing we should put back into the election debate. And really look closely at this matching funds thing, which actually I believe is one of those reforms that, you know, like Obamacare. You know, there's 20 million people without care. A lot more people that can't afford to go to care with the crappy insurance they got. But that passed and people wash their hands. You know, we can't talk about Medicare for all now. Let's not have that happen in campaign finance, because we really do, as people have talked about, have a big crisis in that, you know, we have the best politicians money can buy. And, you know, a system where what the people want doesn't translate into public policy because the money's talking. The politicians are listening more to their donors than their voters. And that's what we need to change. So thank you.
So Howie's reminded me actually about our annual national meeting that's going to be held in July this year up in Salem State University in Massachusetts. And the reason why he's reminding me of that is because he talked about Cambridge. Cambridge successfully passed ranked choice voting. Maine also did the same thing. And we're going to be having a really nice workshop, hopefully, that's going to be discussing how to pass ranked choice voting, because there is an effort right now underway to pass it in Massachusetts. And we're hoping to teach others or other Green Party states how we can do that successfully. So you're right, proportional representation is really important in addition to garnering access or having access to matching funds. I'd like to just take a moment, because we're going to be wrapping up, to see if anybody has any questions of our speakers today. Thank you.
My name is Kevin McCarran. I live here locally. I want to ask Mr. Moch, because you active locally, and if the gentleman from Public Citizen wants to weigh in, that's fine. What do you have you heard of effort to establish a public bank in DC, and what do you think of that?
Were you asking specific, or you're asking?
Mr. Moch, because he works locally, but if the gentleman from Public Citizen.
Yeah, so I'm familiar with it. I'm aware that it's being worked on, but I'm going to punt the answer to one of our other DC Statehood leaders, because he's working on that effort actively, directly. So David, this is Professor David Schwartzman, retired from Howard University and has run for office in DC several times. He chairs our political action committee of the DC State Green Party.
Political Policy and Action Committee, that's the title. But thanks, I've been on the steering committee of the DC Public Banking Center now for 6 years. That was an effort, thanks to Kevin McCarran, who you just heard from. He gave me the idea of putting it in my platform in 2010, running for council at large, and then we started a serious effort to get a public bank. Okay, the status right now is that a feasibility study was funded by the DC Council. They still have not let it out for public view. The executive is holding it. Whether it's even completed or not, we don't know. So we're monitoring this, but there's been a parallel effort to get out of Wells Fargo, get our money out of Wells Fargo, and so on. So that's been sort of synergistic. So that's a short answer. But we are optimistic that we can move forward with this, because there's similar efforts all over the country, like New Jersey, San Francisco, and so on. So I think the fact it's part of the eco-socialist Green New Deal is very important. That's my response.
Can I make a quick commercial?
Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you for your commentary.
Just reminding everybody, at the end of the night, we'll have a drawing. Whoa, yeah. Sorry. Okay, it wasn't doing that before, but all right. Sorry, we're going to have a raffle drawing, so if anybody's interested, we have 5 prizes, and we'll draw it all tonight, and it's like $2 for 1 ticket, and it's $5 for 5 tickets, and it keeps getting better, because it's $10 for 15 tickets, and you get to choose your prize, and it helps women candidates, so thanks.
So our next person who wants to comment as in regards to public funding and financing of campaigns is Margaret Flowers. I apologize.
The first time I called that, you had Kevin Flowers, but not Margaret. We are interchangeable, I guess. No, I just, as someone who's run for office, the financing is one part of it. But the big parts of it are access to the media and access to the debates. If the media doesn't cover us in a serious way, if we're not included in the debates, people don't know that we exist. And so I'd like to hear from Jason, is that right? And Craig. What are you doing to actually advance democracy? To give people more choices than just Democrats and Republicans, who we know are both tied to Wall Street and our war parties, but to actually advance people's choices beyond those. And I think ranked choice voting, one point that I commonly bring up, and it's not a popular point in the Green Party, is the fact that, in Maryland, where not that many people knew that I was running despite everything I did, ranked choice voting was not going to be a help to me. It was actually something that I think the Democrats would embrace, because as my campaign would bring out people who wouldn't normally vote, and then their second vote would likely go to the Democrats, what we're really doing in that case is just raising more votes for the Democrats, and that takes away our power to impact elections. The fact that I got 90,000 votes in our state, 10 times more than the registered Greens, actually scared the Democrats a little bit, and they were worried that I was going to run for governor the next, campaign season. So you know, what is actually being done to advance democracy in addition to, you know, advancing public funding, which we know HR 1 is a deficient bill. But, you know, what are your thoughts on that?
Who would like to answer Margaret's question?
I'll start, but I think Justin wants to jump in. First of all, I want to respond about small donor matching funds. You know, it wasn't a choice that we made. It wasn't a choice that public campaign made to give up clean elections and move towards small donor matching funds. This was a choice forced upon us by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court started with the Buckley decision that declared that money is free speech. It went on to Citizens United, allowing corporations to spend, and then it got even really funky in other decisions. The McCutcheon decision that lifted the aggregate contribution limit that any wealthy person can throw in. And then even weirder, it took a look at the Arizona clean elections model, and it ruled that a clean elections model cannot provide additional public funds to match a wealthy candidate. All I can do is provide one lump sum, and the candidate's locked in that. And with that, many candidates just didn't want to enter the clean elections anymore because they're stuck. You know, if they get outspent by a millionaire, they can't get any more money. And as a result, participation rates have declined. Public campaign helped develop the small donor matching fund system. Basically, we're pushed into coming up with new models to try to help equalize the role of money in politics. And the good small donor system can do that. And so I'm very, very enthusiastic about it. Regarding the question, public debates are required in almost all these models. In HR 1 as well as the DC small donor system. With the DC small donor system, if we can make sure that every candidate, every viable candidate, gets sufficient resources, then they can start buying into the media. And that's how we try to make democracy work.
Yeah, so just quickly, the work that I do today is different than the work that I did a couple of years ago. So I no longer do direct action organizing work. Today, the work I do with IPS is focused on a handful of different areas, but I think what's important when it comes to thinking about different avenues to expanding democracy, right, is thinking about things like, for example, expanding the electorate, for example, and not in the direction of a particular party, but expanding the electorate in a way that gets people to rebuild a sense of value in the system that we have, right? And the system that we have is flawed, the system that we have is broken, the system that we have needs to be overturned, right? I want to say that clearly. But that doesn't mean that we oughtn't be working to expand the electorate, to organize the unorganized, to activate the inactivated. Those are the things I think that are essential if we want to be getting people actually engaged with the system in a meaningful way, right? Because right now there's so little trust for very good reasons. Right now there's so little willingness to take the things that politicians say seriously because we have so many reasons not to trust them in 2019, right? So I think we got to expand the electorate, we got to activate the inactivated.
Thank you so much. Due to the sake of time, did you have a question? Okay, we have time for one more question. And did you want to respond to that first before the next question? Here you go, Howie.
Yeah, the Supreme Court said, the original full public campaign finance, everybody gets equal grant. If somebody stays out of the system and spends a lot of money, they had top-up grants. And that's what was knocked out. Now, the public campaign people, they all said, Well, that means the whole system was declared illegal by the Supreme Court. They knew better, but that's what they told us in public, because they were trying to get people to this matching funds thing. Okay, you get matching funds, you still got the problem of rich folks just throwing money at the election in a variety of ways. If they got it themselves, they can spend it in the system. They can do super PACs, like independent expenditures. They can do dark money. Nobody knows where that's coming from. If, you know, what's now called every voice was serious, they'd be pushing move to amend. So that Congress would have, our representatives would have the power to regulate all this stuff that the Supremes have basically deregulated and said money is speech. And that's, if you really want to get to it, that's what we got to do. And then, you know, whatever, but I'll grant you, you have equal grants, at least it's transparent. You know, who's running on dirty money, who's running on clean money. And if there are mandatory debates, like Margaret was pointing out, and mandatory access to cable, which is regulated by the states, the feds can say something about that, and broadcasters, so that candidates who are qualified, they have to have debates, they have to have time where they can present themselves, not just 30-second ads, but, you know, substantial time where they can lay out their program, people can see and compare it to the other candidates. That kind of thing would really improve the elections. Even with that, people with a lot of money can still, you know, have a lot of influence. But I will say, if the grants are big enough and you have this kind of public access, you know, the rich people that's buying all these ads are kind of bouncing the rubble, as we say about nuclear overkill, right? I mean, at a certain point, Tom Golisano, the paychecks right-wing billionaire, spent $90 million running for governor. And he just got a few percent more than me, who spent, what did I spend? $200,000 basically was what we spent in 2014 to get 5%. This guy spent $90 million to get 8%. So, anyway, so that's my response.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Howie. And so we have room for one last question.
Hey there, it's Nancy Wallace. I'm co-chair of Montgomery County Green Party here up the road. And along with the rest of the Green Party, we ran 27 candidates in the state of Maryland this past election cycle. We had 8 in our county. They ranged from a major serious candidate who'd been out there for a year and a half and was well known by the whole progressive community. And Tim Willard, he's the co-chair with me, he got over 30,000 votes in a county, and that was probably about 18-1 for our registration. So that was really good. And he still had full-time responsibilities at home and childcare and all sorts of other stuff. So I think what I see over, about 16 years in the party now is people really trust us. I think we should look objectively at the fact that we're making progress. We've got 68 people elected in California. We have 1 in Maryland. Ours didn't get to that point. It's an insanely slow and suicidally slow process right now, given the deadline on climate change. But just day after day after day, when I say I'm with the Green Party, I just get smiles on people's faces. So I think our fundamental values really are working out there. And we shouldn't hesitate to give ourselves credit for the suffering that we go through of impatience while we continue to get that message out there time and time and time again. And the question I've got, and I'm really curious about what the panel thinks, is my sense is that we need to focus more on the economic alternatives, the kind of new America, new economy, because you get people, hook them in with the values and the message, and then they say, okay, what do I do? And so this public banking, time banks, local CSAs, there are a lot of well-developed, mature, alternate economic models that demonetize and work against the extreme concentration of capital. So what do you think about increasing that and strengthening our partnership and helping seed and facilitate more of those at the local level? Because I kind of think the power structure is so entrenched and so corrupt, we're beating ourselves to death against it. And I think we have to regrow a new set of power relationships. We need to take back, the worker has to take back the wealth of their hands.
Who would like to approach that or answer that first? Here you go, Howie.
Yeah, I agree. You gotta speak to people's basic needs first before you can talk about any other issue. And that's why I was the first candidate in America to run on the Green New Deal in 2010, which is now a big deal. But what we talked about then coming out of the Great Recession was the Economic Bill of Rights that Franklin Roosevelt talked about in his 1944 State of the Union address, asked Congress to enact the right to a living wage job, an income above poverty, decent housing, comprehensive health care, and a good education. And he had some other things about protection for farmers and small business from monopolies. And in that period, the way to get the economy moving again was big public investment in clean energy. And we said at that time 100% clean energy by 2020. And we were basing that on some climate science from James Hansen and Kevin Anderson in the UK and another group in Germany. And in fact, in Australia, they had a plan for zero carbon in Australia by 2020. Now later, Mark Jacobson came forward. In fact, right before that campaign, he said, we can go globally. It was on the cover of Scientific American. Wind, water, and sun by 2030. And we didn't see the technical work on that until 2011 in energy policy, but it was good enough to run on it. But we said 2020 because the numbers that these climate scientists were putting out in terms of transition meant that developed countries had to move that fast. And now we're talking about not just the energy system, but all the industrial sectors. Agriculture, we got to have regenerative agriculture. Not only draws down carbon, but it's organic, so it isn't killing off the insects with pesticides. So if you've been reading the papers lately, maybe, nearly all extinct in about 2 decades. And without insects, agriculture collapsed, and ecosystems collapse. And then the foundations of our lives collapse. I mean, we are really on the brink, not just with the climate, but with a bunch of ecological crises. So we need a sustainable economy. So I didn't think it get mentioned yet. I just announced today I'm forming an exploratory committee to seek the Green Party nomination with an eco-socialist Green New Deal that involves the Economic Bill of Rights and a Green Economy Reconstruction Program to rebuild all these sectors, use public housing to desegregate, build green buildings, develop walkable communities together with public transportation. Working with a guy that worked with Seymour Melman who used to work on peace conversion, industrial engineering. We're pricing this thing out. It's in the trillions. At some point we'll put that out in the next couple of months. But we're going to put out a Green New Deal there that's going to be the standard that everybody's going to have to measure up to. And it's going to, put the price on it and say what it is and say, we're the original Green New Dealers, deal with this. And so getting back to the original question, the Economic Bill of Rights, that's been on the agenda for 75 years. Democrats had it in their platform when it was, helpful to them to get votes. They had a bill, and it was called the Full Employment Bill, but they changed it to the Employment Bill because there really wasn't a Full Employment Bill in 1946. You had the Hawkins bill, tried to do the same thing, and by the time it was good, it did not provide the right to a job. There's legislation, Congress carried for a long time. Now, who's carrying it? Anyways, somebody put it in there for, basically the Works Progress Administration as an employer of last resort. We have, National Approved Medicare for All. That was national health care. That started 36 with the Committee on Economic Security, Harry Hawkins, Francis Perkins. They wanted to do it, and Roosevelt said, no, the doctors will be pissed off. After World War II, Truman tried to get it. It was in the Democratic platform until Clinton got the nomination, then he pulled it out. And now we got politicians that say, like Nancy Pelosi, it's off the table. We can't talk about that. There are people in this room, and not one of them got arrested around that time we're talking about Obamacare because they wouldn't let somebody like John Conyers, who had the bill, testify in his own Congress about the bill. And it was the Democrats stopping it. So I'm starting to speak like a candidate. I'm going to stop.
Thank you so much, Howie. I believe one last comment, Darryl Moch.
So final response.
Maybe you should be a candidate, not just talk like one.
People out there do a good job.
So, very good question, I think, and I think it's important. What I want to say is that part of what we have to do is start talking to people where their needs are. We've heard about the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and there are other models like that. And Howie is absolutely right. Unless we are speaking to people where their basic needs are, they're not listening anymore. So the banking, you asked about public banking, CSAs and other things like this. Here's the challenge. The challenge is getting people to understand what those things are and what they mean. Because they've been convinced by the powers that be otherwise that those are bad things, or those are things that are not going to work, or you can't trust it, right? And so we've got to re-educate an electorate of people to understand what it is really that we're talking about and how these mechanisms could be able to help lift them up out of their places of poverty. So that's one aspect of how we begin to do that. I am working right now on this concept, and I've been talking to some folks about issues around socialism, issues around Green Party, and where all these things work together and flow together. And one of the things that strikes me is that the Black Panther Party, which wasn't necessarily a political party in and of itself, but the Black Panthers had a way of working to rebuild the community from the community up. This is the model that if Greens want to be successful around the country, we need to begin looking at what black folks were doing, because we're talking about the needs of black folks, the poor folks, poor whites that are in rural areas that don't have access to other kinds of care. They're in the same boat as urban blacks or urban Latinx folks, right? Or other immigrants or folks that are coming over from somewhere else who are looking for a way up, looking for an opportunity, looking for the propaganda that the US government has put out all around the world to say, hey, come over here and then we build a wall. Or we want to build a wall, right? So we need to look at another model of how to organize in community, how to bring about making change happen for people that's tangible, that they can feel. Then you can get them to vote for you. You can get them to vote their interest because they see their interest being magnified. So I think that's the key right now. What we have to do is we're educating people around these particular products and models that will be helpful, and then doing things that speak to them at the place where they are, so that they then can feel empowered that their vote will make a difference, because then they can see it happening with you. And even if we don't win in the election, they see the work that's changing and transforming their lives, and they'll believe we'll get it the next time, or the next time, or the next time, and they won't give up.
What a positive note to end on. We want to thank every single one of you for coming this evening. If you're here, it's because election and campaign finance reform was a really important issue to you. And it's an important issue for the Green Party of the United States, and also for the Women's Caucus, and we are going to continue, that's right, and we are going to continue to push our agenda in regards to election reform and establish integrity in our voting system and our electoral system. So we want to thank you again. Please take time to mingle with some of our panels and ask some questions and get to know them. And so, yet again, thank you.
Before you go,
Peace.
If you're in the area and you're going to be here tomorrow, the Statehood Green Party has our monthly meeting. It'll be at Shaw Library at 6:30 p.m. You're all welcome to come, both share the experiences that you've had here this week with us, and also hear what's going on there and how we can continue to build relationships across the country. So, and those of you that are from the area and live here, we'd love to see you guys in the party and working with us.
And thank you everybody for coming. My name is Jennifer Sullivan. I organize this lobby, and I do believe that we do have to meet our opposition everywhere. We meet them on the streets. We meet them in the corporate boardrooms. We meet them in the Houses of Congress. So there is a bill. It's called Title 18, subsection 201. If you look it up, you can find it in the Cornell laws, the Cornell school laws. Title 18, Section 201, they're totally ignoring it. It's about bribery of a candidate. And so anyway, I'm going to do the drawing, so hang in for that. And I just kind of wanted to thank everybody. And the good news is, but I'm sitting here with not only that, but I have like so many bills that we've tried. People have tried to do this voter reform and election reform, and it's like the 700 pages were full of good things, but there weren't always good things. These are short bills by Alan Grayson from Florida, and he was putting them out during a Republican, he was a Democrat during a Republican House, so it was hard for him to get these bills, but they were like 2 pages. They're very easy to read, really easy to understand, and when we were lobbying, we were told by the Democrats that were, they passed the bill, they said it's not going to go through the Senate, but we're going to bring it through incrementally. So we're there to make sure that they do all the good things, because there's a lot of good things in it, and then just don't do any of the bad things.